Hello. Today I'd like to perhaps give you some ideas of how you might store and use some of your leftovers. Now, as we know, that leftovers can be very, very delicious. Sometimes we've done a project, quilting project, and I'm talking about fabric leftovers here. We've done a project and there's little bits and pieces left over. They might just be little bits like this, or they might be bigger bits like this. And either way, we've got to find a way of storing them so that they're usable. And easily usable. Now sometimes if it's something as large as this piece, because this is quite large, you might find that it's better to fold that and store that neatly. And what I'm talking about storing today is probably smaller bits. On the other hand, you may think, well, I'm never really going to use that as a whole piece, I might cut it down. So what I'm suggesting today is that you may want to cut some of your bits and pieces down. So I get quite a lot of ends. They've usually got a selvage on them from when I've cut other bits and pieces out, and I find that they're very useful, but they could even be more useful, more readily useful, if I've cut them and stored them. So something like a piece like this, I've got a selvage here which is really not a lot of help to anyone. It needs to be taken off. So I might have a look, and I use the measurements on my board a lot, and I might just think, well, how much can I get out of there? So I think I can pretty much cut a 4-inch piece out of here, so because it's 4 inches across that way, and I'm doing it sort of along the length. Now it's not really an exact size for anything. I know it's 4 inches wide, but it's an irregular size long. It's actually about 5 inches that way. But I'm just going to leave it as that, as a strip. It's kind of not one thing or another. I could cut it into a square, but I may find I want something a little bit longer at some stage. And then another piece that I've got here, same thing. I'm going to line up my one edge and decide how wide a piece I can get out of that. And I think I can probably comfortably cut just a 2-inch piece, because this selvage comes right over here. And again, I'm going to leave it as a strip. So I find that cutting my leftovers into strips of varying sizes is really helpful. I'll just do this one quickly. Now this one hasn't got a very straight edge here, so I'm going to trim that one off as well. And this one again, I'm going to be able to get a 2-inch out of. I find that there's various sizes that I work quite often with, and they usually go up in 1/2-inch increments. Occasionally you use something that's at that 1/4 inch, where you could always cut something down that was slightly bigger, or you might be cutting it out specifically from other fabrics anyway. But as far as my leftovers go, I just have set up, I've got some drawers, I've got a whole series. This is just one portion of the drawers, and I've got it starting at 1.5 inches, 2 inches, 2.5 inches, 3 inches, and so on. And I've got it so that they go up to 6.5 inches. And then I've actually got a spare drawer at the bottom, which I can put all sorts of other bits and pieces in. So in general, I would store my strips, these are 2-inch bits that I've just cut, in my drawer like that. Now they could be squares if I have some squares left over from a project, or there might be half square triangle units that fit a particular size. They can all go in those sizes, and I might pop the strips to one side and the squares to the other, or something like that. And I find that this works really well, so that when you want to go and make a project, particularly if you're going to make a scrap or leftover quilt project, and everything's ready for you, sitting there for you to draw on as a sort of starting resource. So some of these are a little bit longer, and the same thing, I would just cut this one. I can get 2.5 inches out of, so I would cut that into a 2.5 inch. Now the other thing is, you may want to start keeping some selvages. Working with selvages can be quite fun, especially if they've got any information on them. So that's a 2.5 inch, that's going to sit in my 2.5 inch drawer. If I've got something a little bit bigger like this, which I'm not too sure if I want to keep as one big piece, or I think I might like to cut that into usable strips, you will find that as you go along, there's various sizes that are more usable than others. Quite often 2.5 inches is a commonly used size. I use a lot of 5-inch, which allows me then to cut down to 2.5 inch. But sometimes it doesn't really matter. You might just want a whole variety of things. And as I said, up to 6.5 inches is a common size that I would use, where I might be using leftovers and a variety of fabrics for. So again, I'm just going to tidy up my edge. I've got this piece folded over, and I can actually get a 6.5 inch piece out of that. So I probably will do that, because that to me would be sensible, rather than cutting it into lots of smaller strips. I have the opportunity of cutting it down later if that's what I'd like to do. I've still got a strip left, so I wouldn't want to waste that, and I can actually get a 2-inch strip out of that. So again, I'll get a 2-inch strip out of that, and I'll pop that in my drawer. So most of what I do, I would cut into strips, ready to then cut into squares or other. Sometimes you want rectangle units, so if you've cut everything into squares and you suddenly want a 2-inch by 4-inch rectangle, well, your squares are not a lot of help. So still leave it in a size that you can cut from, but maybe a more user-friendly size as far as storage and knowing what you've got when you want to go to something to use it up. So that was just an idea. I've also got a couple of square rulers that I might, if I've got pieces that I can get squares out of. I probably haven't got anything here that I can get squares out of. Maybe I have. This piece here, I find it's probably already 5 inches wide as a strip, and I could just cut that into a 5-inch square, and again I would pop that into my 5-inch drawer. Now you may not have a set of drawers, you might have a series of boxes. Perhaps you can go and get some shoe boxes. Shoe shops often have boxes they don't need anymore, and you could label those. It doesn't have to be anything as fancy as the plastic drawers. I just happen to have them, so it's convenient for me, and I can keep them in a whole stack. I can go to them quickly and easily. So that was really just an idea of how you might organise your leftovers so that they're ready for when you want to cook them up into some other delicious quilts. So thank you.